Still holding the microphone in the barn, I felt shock hit when my own son laughed about my life like it was a punchline. As my fingers tightened around the metal, I didn't raise my voice, just steadied my breath and stayed standing. While the mic hummed softly in my hand, the warmth of the lights and the silence pressed heavier than the joke. The same hum followed my thoughts as I realized this wasn't humor, it was years of disrespect finally spoken out loud. That's when I understood betrayal hurts most when it wears a child's face. Still gripping the mic, I decided justice didn't need shouting. It needed truth, said once, in public. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The barn was filled with the hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft creak of wooden beams swaying in the summer breeze. It was the kind of rustic charm you'd expect from a family reunion in a quiet suburban town, weathered chairs set out under strings of fairy lights. Mismatched plates of potato salad and finger foods scattered across the long wooden tables. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of earth and family. Yet Rebecca could feel a chill settle around her as the evening drew on. She glanced at the faces around the room. Old aunts and uncles, cousins who had once been strangers now finding common ground, and some who looked like they couldn't wait to escape. The laughter, the forced cheerfulness, all felt too loud, too sharp. Her children, her family, all circling her with a kind of distance. Like the walls of this barn were too thick to break through. Rebecca stayed near the back of the room, quietly nursing her drink. She had told herself that today was about family, about reconnecting. But the weight of years of neglect sat heavily on her shoulders, making it hard to shake the sense that the people here didn't really see her, not the way she needed them to. Ethan stood up at the front, glass in hand. His posture was casual, leaning just a little too comfortably into the microphone. The crowd grew still, waiting for his words. He had that same smirk on his face, the one he always wore when he wanted to feel in control. It irritated her more than she expected. She'd spent years caring for him, for both of them, and this moment felt like a culmination of everything she'd sacrificed without ever being acknowledged. To Mom, finally moving out and living her own life, Ethan said, the words smooth and deliberate. His voice carried across the room, cutting through the murmur of the guests. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd, like they were unsure whether it was okay to laugh at all. The kind of laugh that masked discomfort. A few people shifted uncomfortably, but most just stayed quiet, unsure how to react. No one looked at Rebecca directly, except Katie. Rebecca could feel her daughter's eyes on her, but Katie stayed still, her expression frozen, caught between loyalty to her brother and a deep discomfort at the turn of events. She didn't speak, didn't offer comfort, didn't even move. Rebecca's hand tightened around her glass. Her throat felt tight, constricted, and for a moment, she wasn't sure if she could swallow the bitterness rising in her chest. A toast, a joke, Ethan's joke. She could hear the soft thrum of her heartbeat in her ears. The edges of the room seemed to blur, but she didn't move. Not yet. Ethan's smirk lingered, waiting for the room's response, and Rebecca could feel the weight of the silence settling heavily around them. She had expected a lot of things tonight. Awkward conversations, maybe even some tears. But this was new. The kind of humiliation that echoed back to all the years she'd spent feeling unimportant, unworthy. Her son, standing there, mocking her, and everyone was laughing. At her. Her fingers trembled as she set her glass down with a soft clink. The sound of it seemed to break something inside her. She rose, slowly, deliberately, and as she did, the room quieted. A collective breath held in the air, as if they all sensed what was coming before she even knew. Rebecca didn't look at Ethan. She didn't need to. She felt the weight of his gaze on her, but she refused to meet it. Instead, she kept her eyes on the floor, her steps measured, until she stood beside him. For a split second, Ethan's confident posture faltered. His smile wavered, just barely. But he didn't take the microphone away, didn't ask her to sit back down. Not yet. Rebecca reached for the mic, her fingers curling around it with a quiet force that surprised even her. There was no word spoken, no gesture made. The simple motion of her hand meeting the microphone felt like a declaration in itself. She had heard him. She had seen him. She was done being the joke. The room seemed to hold its breath, every eye now on her. No one spoke, not even Katie. Ethan opened his mouth, ready to protest. But before he could say anything, Rebecca leaned into the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "Let's talk about that, Ethan," she said. And the words dropped into the room like stones into a quiet lake. The silence that followed felt deafening. Rebecca didn't move, didn't even blink. She was aware of every person in the room, every pair of eyes on her. But in that moment, there was only one person she cared about. Only one person whose reaction mattered. Her son's. Ethan's face drained of color. His eyes widened, and the smirk that had once been so sure now wavered, turning to a hint of discomfort. The laughter in the room seemed to fade into the background, the weight of the moment sinking in. Her voice didn't falter. She would not let it. "Let's talk about what that really means," she repeated softly. And just like that, the moment stretched. The microphone felt heavy in Rebecca's hand, like it belonged to someone else. The silence in the room was thick now, almost suffocating. Her heart was pounding in her chest, each beat amplified in her ears. But she couldn't bring herself to look at Ethan. Not yet. She took a breath, steadying herself, her fingers brushing over the screen of her phone. She had saved the texts, of course, every last one of them. It wasn't the first time Ethan had turned his back on her, but this was different. This moment, this public humiliation, was the culmination of years of disdain she'd endured, and she would make sure everyone saw it. The screen lit up with his messages, the words she'd read so many times now, words that still cut, still stung. Rebecca's thumb moved across the screen with a practiced, deliberate motion. She felt the heat of the moment rise in her cheeks, a strange mixture of empowerment and shame, as if she were about to unearth a secret no one had ever been meant to see. She cleared her throat, drawing the attention of every person in the room. Even the air seemed to still. Ethan had been so sure, so confident just moments ago. But now he stood frozen. His eyes, wide with disbelief, locked on hers. The smug expression had been wiped clean from his face. "Let's see, shall we?" Rebecca said, her voice quieter now, but each word carrying its own weight. She let her fingers glide across the screen, scrolling through a list of texts that felt like they were carved into her very soul. The first one popped up. "Mom's such a joke, always acting like she's the martyr." Rebecca's throat tightened, but she didn't flinch. She let the words hang in the air. A few guests exchanged glances, unease rippling through the room. Some shifted in their seats, their discomfort palpable. The kind of discomfort that comes when a truth you'd rather not face comes crashing into the light. She scrolled down. She thinks she's important, but who even cares? She'll never understand that life isn't all about being the center of attention. The room felt smaller now, the silence deeper. She could hear Katie's breath catch behind her, a barely audible gasp. But Rebecca didn't turn to look at her daughter. Not yet. "I can't wait until she finally leaves. It'll be a relief." Rebecca's finger hovered over the next message, but the weight of Ethan's stare, burning through her, made her pause. He was fuming now, his face red with anger. His hand twitched toward her, but she didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Instead, she continued, her voice even and controlled. "Her whole life has been one big pity party. Honestly, she deserves to be alone." The words hit the room like a cold wave. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rebecca could feel the shift, the sudden discomfort, the growing realization that they were all hearing something they weren't meant to, but there was no going back now. This was Ethan's truth, as raw and unforgiving as it was. Rebecca paused again, letting the weight of his words settle around them. She felt a sick thrill at the silence that stretched between them. It wasn't satisfaction, exactly. It was more like reclaiming something lost. Her dignity, her voice. Ethan took a step forward, his hands shaking, but he didn't reach for the mic. Not yet. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. Just a choked sound, a useless attempt at regaining control. Give me that, he demanded, his voice cracking, but the command lacked its usual force. He was losing his grip, slipping. Rebecca didn't even look at him. She just lifted her chin, her gaze still fixed on the audience. You don't get to control this, Ethan, she said, her voice almost serene now, the words flowing like a river she couldn't stop. This is what you've really thought of me. All this time, this is how you've always seen me. The mic trembled in her hand, but she kept her grip firm. Ethan stood frozen, staring at her in disbelief. His face had turned from red to an unhealthy shade of pale. His mouth opened, then closed again, as if he couldn't quite reconcile the truth of what she was doing. The room was quiet now, too quiet, and Rebecca realized, with a strange clarity, that she no longer cared what they thought. She didn't care about Ethan's anger or Katie's sorrow. She didn't care about any of it. For the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt a sense of control. She felt it in her bones, in the power of the mic in her hand, in the truth she was laying bare. This wasn't a mother protecting her son anymore. This was a woman reclaiming herself. The shift was happening. She could feel it, a quiet storm swirling in the silence. I've been your punching bag, Ethan, she said, her voice steady, unshakable. And I'm done. Ethan stood there, his eyes wild, his face contorted in something between anger and disbelief, but there was no one left to back him up. The room had turned against him in an instant, not in judgment, but in quiet recognition. This was the moment they could no longer look away. And for the first time in years, Rebecca wasn't invisible anymore. She stepped back, slowly lowering the mic. Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he didn't make a move, didn't say another word. The room was still silent, still waiting. Rebecca smiled, the smallest of smiles, one that only she could understand. But it was enough. Enough to know that this had been the moment that changed everything. As she walked away from the front, away from the uncomfortable silence, her heartbeat slowly began to steady. She had said her piece. The silence was oppressive. The barn felt like a cage now, every breath too loud, every heartbeat too heavy. Rebecca's hands, still clutching the microphone, trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she had just done. The room was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, but no one spoke. No one moved. Rebecca didn't break the stillness. She stood there, feeling the shift in the air, the weight of all the eyes on her. She didn't look at Ethan, though she could feel his gaze drilling into her back. His anger had faltered, replaced by something rawer, more vulnerable. Across the room, Katie's eyes locked onto hers. Guilt, regret. It was all there in the soft gaze of her daughter, but Katie didn't speak. She couldn't. The words were stuck, just like they had always been. Between loyalty to Ethan and the truth Rebecca had just exposed, Katie was paralyzed, her face tight with something Rebecca couldn't quite name. Tommy, Rebecca's ex-husband, shifted awkwardly in his seat. He tugged at his collar, avoiding everyone's eyes, as if hoping the whole thing would blow over. He had never been one for confrontation, never truly involved in their battles. He was here, physically but emotionally distant. A spectator. Always a spectator. Rebecca's gaze flicked briefly to Nora, who stood a few paces behind her, watching the scene unfold with a knowing look. Nora wasn't surprised. She never was. There was a quiet approval in her eyes, a subtle nod of understanding that made Rebecca feel, for the first time that evening, like someone saw her. The stillness stretched, and finally, Ethan spoke. His voice cracked as he spoke her name, but his words cut through the tension like a jagged knife. You just embarrassed me in front of everyone, he said, his tone faltering, the bravado long gone. He stood there, vulnerable, exposed, his hands clenched at his sides as if he might lash out, but instead, he just looked defeated. Rebecca didn't respond. She let the silence stretch longer, watching him squirm under the weight of his own words. The room waited for her to break, for her to soften, but she wouldn't. Not this time. Ethan took a step forward, desperation creeping into his features, but Rebecca didn't flinch. She just stood there, letting his words echo into the void. Katie's breath caught behind her, but Rebecca didn't turn to face her. She couldn't. She wasn't going to turn back now. And then, the moment passed. Ethan's face had gone pale, his frustration giving way to something darker, something he couldn't hide anymore. He stood there, silent, as if the weight of what had just happened had finally sunk in. Rebecca walked away, not looking back. Not at him, not at Katie, not at anyone. The room, once filled with nervous chatter and forced laughter, was now silent watching her leave. And for the first time in years, Rebecca didn't care if they followed. She had said what needed to be said. The door creaked softly as she stepped into the night. The barn was still. The air was thick with the silence that followed Rebecca's words. The sounds of the reunion had all but vanished, replaced by an uneasy stillness. People shifted in their seats, glancing at one another, but no one spoke. The room, once filled with forced laughter and polite chatter, now felt like a cage. Rebecca stood at the edge of the room, the microphone still gripped in her hand. She didn't know where to look. Her eyes scanned the floor, the walls, anywhere but Ethan. He was still there, standing at the front, his phone glued to his hand. His face was unreadable, his gaze fixed somewhere far away. He had retreated, physically and emotionally, into the screen, as if hiding from the consequences of his own actions. Katie, though, hadn't retreated. She stood off to the side, her expression caught between guilt and confusion. Her eyes met Rebecca's, and for a fleeting moment, Rebecca saw something like regret flicker in her daughter's gaze. But Katie didn't speak. She just stood there, not sure what to say, not sure how to make this right. Rebecca felt a rush of emotions, relief that Katie was finally seeing the truth, but also anger. Anger that it had taken this long, that it had taken a public humiliation for Katie to finally realize how deep the damage had gone. "Mom," Katie's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. She stepped toward her, but Rebecca held up a hand, stopping her. "I don't need to hear it, Katie." The words were harder than she meant them to be, but she couldn't soften now. Not when it was too late for apologies. "You didn't know? Well, now you do." Katie opened her mouth, trying to respond, but Rebecca wasn't waiting for her. She wasn't waiting for anyone. Not anymore. She had been waiting her entire life for people to see her, to acknowledge the sacrifices she'd made, the ways she'd held everything together for so long. But in the end, it hadn't been enough. The family she'd fought so hard for had turned its back on her long ago. And now, standing here, she realized how much of that weight she was finally willing to shed. Turning away from Katie, Rebecca reached for her phone, feeling a sick sense of finality as she read the text from Ethan. "You've ruined the family." The words stung, but they didn't break her anymore. She had spent years trying to keep this family together, to hold it all in place. She was done. With a deep breath, Rebecca set her phone down. She didn't need to respond. Not now. Not ever. She glanced one last time at Katie, who was still standing there, unsure. Ethan didn't even look up from his phone. Without another word, Rebecca walked out of the barn, her heart pounding with something new. Freedom. The cool night air felt like a promise. She had taken the first step, and there was no turning back. Rebecca's hands shook as she folded the last of the clothes into a box. The house was quiet now, the silence wrapping itself around her like a suffocating blanket. She had packed away the years, photos, keepsakes, remnants of a life she had once tried so hard to hold together. Each item felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders, but the finality of it all made her heart ache. Katie had offered to help, but Rebecca had insisted on doing it alone. The years of neglect, of emotional manipulation, had piled up into something too heavy to share with anyone now. This was her moment, her first step toward the life she should have been living all along. She wasn't going to let anyone make it easier for her. As she packed, her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. She ignored it at first, focusing on her task, but it kept pinging. Each notification a reminder that he wasn't ready to let go. Finally, she checked the screen. "We need to talk. Please." Rebecca set the phone down, unread. She didn't need to hear it. She was done with the endless cycle of apologies and empty promises. The sound of a soft knock at the door broke her focus. She didn't need to check the peephole. She knew exactly who it was. Ethan. His presence had been hanging over her all day, and now he was here, just like she knew he would be. She opened the door to find him standing there, looking smaller than she remembered. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes cast down. He had the look of someone who expected to be forgiven without understanding what he had done to deserve it. "Mom!" His voice cracked, the usual bravado nowhere to be found. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have said those things." Rebecca didn't flinch. She didn't feel anything but tired. She wasn't here for his apologies anymore. She had heard them all before. They didn't matter. "You shouldn't have," she replied, her tone flat. "But you did." Ethan's eyes flickered to the boxes at her feet, then back to her. A silent plea for her to soften. But Rebecca didn't. She had spent years softening, making excuses for him, forgiving him for every cruel word, every neglectful action. No more. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to him, her gaze never leaving his face. "Read it," she said simply. He hesitated, taking the envelope with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the words, confusion crossing his face as he read. A legal document. Her Declaration of Independence. Official. Irrevocable. His face drained of color. "What is this?" he whispered. Rebecca met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm done trying to make you care." Ethan didn't say anything. He couldn't. There was nothing left for him to say. Rebecca turned and walked away, her footsteps firm on the hardwood floor. This time, there was no looking back. Rebecca sank into the small armchair, her fingers tracing the edges of the couch's worn fabric. The apartment was simple, cozy, in its own quiet way. Bare walls, yet every corner had been slowly transformed. A vase of fresh flowers on the windowsill, books stacked neatly beside the couch, a painting of the ocean hanging crookedly on the wall. It felt like the start of something new, like she was finally giving herself permission to breathe. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing. No one was demanding anything from her. There was no dinner to cook, no phone calls to answer, no emotional weight to carry. She moved through the apartment in a calm, deliberate way, putting away the remnants of a past life she wasn't ready to leave behind completely just yet. The past, though, was fading, quietly, almost imperceptibly. Katie came by often, bringing food, flowers, anything to fill the silence. Rebecca had expected more guilt from her, more attempts at explaining herself. But it wasn't like that. Katie simply wanted to be there, to show that she cared. She helped Rebecca with little things, organizing kitchen drawers, picking out a few plants for the windowsill. But no matter how hard Katie tried, Rebecca knew it wasn't the same. The damage had already been done, and now there was no going back. "You're doing okay?" Katie asked one afternoon, setting down a box of fresh muffins on the kitchen counter. "I know this is hard." Rebecca took a deep breath before answering, her eyes drifting to the half-packed boxes in the corner. "I'm okay. I'm just adjusting." Katie's eyes were searching, like she was trying to read Rebecca's mind. It wasn't enough for her to just accept the change, to let it be. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I wish I had done more, sooner." Rebecca shook her head, her lips tight. "You didn't know, Katie. Neither of us did. But I'm doing this now. For me." Katie nodded, but there was still a flicker of guilt in her eyes. She couldn't let go of the feeling that she should have done more. But Rebecca had let that go long ago. Katie's attempts to fix things felt more like a reminder of all the things Rebecca had tried to fix for years and failed. Later that week, Rebecca started therapy. She had avoided it for so long, telling herself that everything would be okay if she just kept going. But now, she needed help. She needed to confront all the years of emotional neglect, all the damage she'd carried in silence. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Ethan. "We need to talk. Please." Rebecca stared at the message for a long moment, the words echoing in her mind, but she didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence in her apartment was no longer uncomfortable. It was peaceful. She was beginning to realize, more each day, that it was enough. Rebecca sat on the small couch, her fingers gently pressing into the clay of a half-formed bowl. The apartment, once silent and bare, was now filled with pieces of her soul. A vase she had crafted herself sat on the kitchen counter. A half-finished painting hung crookedly on the wall, and a stack of books lay beside her on the coffee table. Books she had chosen because they piqued her interest, not because they had any obligation tied to them. Each item was a step toward reclaiming herself, toward filling the space with things that were hers and hers alone. She had always been so busy, first as a mother, then as a wife, and later as a caretaker. Her life had been filled with giving, often to the point of exhaustion, leaving little room for her own desires. But now, in this small apartment, she was learning how to fill the silence with her own needs. Katie came by a few times a week, always with flowers, food, or some gesture of love. Rebecca could see the guilt in her daughter's eyes, the unspoken plea for forgiveness, and for the reconciliation she still hoped could happen between Rebecca and Ethan. But Rebecca wasn't interested in healing what had been broken beyond repair. "You know, you could at least talk to him," Katie said one afternoon, her voice soft but insistent. "He's still your son, Mom. You're both so hurt." Rebecca sighed, setting the clay aside. Katie always tried to fix things, even when there was no fixing to be done. "I'm not his emotional caretaker anymore, Katie. He's not my responsibility." Katie looked at her, eyes wide with a mix of confusion and sadness. "But aren't you both hurt?" Rebecca smiled faintly, the weight of the years finally settling into her bones. "Yes, but I've been hurt long enough. It's his turn now." Katie's face tightened with unspoken emotion, and Rebecca could see the struggle in her daughter's eyes. She still believed, deep down, that Ethan deserved the benefit of the doubt, that family came first. But Rebecca had spent years waiting for Ethan to change, to acknowledge the harm he had caused, and now it felt like a wasted effort. After Katie left, Rebecca picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over the messages from Ethan. The latest one read, "Family betrayal. You think you're better than us now?" Her stomach tightened, the familiar sting of his manipulation still there. But the rage, the sadness, it was all fading. She had spent enough time feeling responsible for his pain. She wasn't going to carry it anymore. Rebecca set the phone down without replying, a weight lifting from her chest. The silence in the apartment had always felt uncomfortable at first, but now it felt like a refuge. She had filled it with things she loved, things that spoke to who she truly was. And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the quiet. She was beginning to realize it was enough. She wasn't alone anymore. Not with herself. Katie sat across from Rebecca, the tension in the air thick, yet somehow more palpable than ever. The small apartment, filled with the warmth of sunlight filtering through the windows, felt too quiet as they sat together in the kitchen. It was the silence that had taken years to embrace. But today, it was necessary. Katie had come over with the usual offering: flowers, homemade cookies, and the all-too-familiar look of someone trying to fix things. Her eyes were swollen, like she had been crying before she came. But this time, Rebecca saw something different in her daughter's face. It was a shift she hadn't noticed before. Katie wasn't just looking for a way to mend things between her and Ethan. She was looking for a way to mend herself. "I've been thinking a lot," Katie started, setting down the cookies. "About everything. About you and Dad and Ethan. And me." She paused, searching for the words, her gaze flickering between her mother and the floor. "I never realized how much I was torn between you two. How much I tried to be everything to everyone." Rebecca didn't interrupt. She had been waiting for Katie to see it, for Katie to understand that she didn't need to choose sides anymore. "I don't think you were the one to blame," Rebecca said softly. "You were just doing what you thought was best." Katie shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I should have known. I should have seen how badly you were hurting." Her voice cracked as she reached for Rebecca's hand, the weight of her guilt making it harder for her to speak. "I always thought you'd just get over it, you know? But you never did. And I couldn't make it better. I couldn't fix it for you." Rebecca squeezed her hand gently, the pain in Katie's voice echoing in her own heart. "Katie, you didn't fail me. You were trying to hold us all together when I was falling apart, but you're not responsible for fixing Ethan or for what happened between us." Katie swallowed, her lips trembling. I just wish I had seen it sooner. I wanted to make everything right. Rebecca smiled softly, her heart heavy with the understanding of how much her daughter had carried. Katie, you don't have to make everything right. That's my responsibility now. I'm choosing to live for myself, for the first time in years. She took a deep breath. And you need to choose that for yourself, too. You don't have to carry Ethan's pain anymore. You don't have to fix him. He has to do that himself. Katie nodded, the guilt starting to lift off her shoulders. I'll help you, Mom. I'll help you set boundaries with him. I'll support you. I know you will, Rebecca said, her voice steady. But you have to take care of you first. Katie's eyes were clearer now, no longer burdened by the desire to fix things for others. I will, she whispered. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Rebecca could feel the bond between them growing stronger, more real. Ethan's name didn't come up again, and for the first time, Rebecca didn't feel the weight of guilt hanging over her. As Katie left that evening, Rebecca stood by the door, watching her daughter walk away, feeling the quiet strength of what they'd just shared. It wasn't about fixing broken things anymore. It was about finally letting them be. The message came through at midnight, Ethan again. Can we talk? I've been thinking a lot about what happened. Rebecca stared at the screen for a moment, the familiar weight of his words pressing down on her chest. She had been waiting for this, knowing it was only a matter of time before he tried to re-enter her life. She could already feel the old pull, the urge to respond, to smooth things over, to fix him. But she had spent years doing that. And now, it was time for something different. She set her phone down, staring at the blank screen as the quiet of the apartment filled the space. The silence no longer felt oppressive, but rather comforting, like a space where she could finally breathe. Ethan's messages were the last vestiges of a past she was shedding, and the weight of it no longer held the power it once had. The next morning, another message from him. I don't understand why you're doing this. You're just cutting me out like I never mattered. I need my... Mother, I'm sorry. Rebecca closed her eyes. She had heard it all before. She was supposed to be the one who fixed everything, the one who healed the broken parts of him. But those days were over. She wasn't going to carry his pain anymore. When Katie came over later that afternoon, Rebecca could see the worry in her eyes, the same anxiety that had plagued her for years. Katie had heard from Ethan too. She had come, once again, to try to fix things between them. Mom, Katie said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. Ethan's really upset. He keeps texting me. He doesn't get why you won't talk to him. Rebecca took a deep breath, steadying herself. Katie, I'm not punishing him. I'm setting boundaries. I can't keep being the one he calls when things go wrong. I've done that for too long. Katie looked down, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. But he's your son. Don't you want to make it right? Rebecca shook her head. I've been making it right for too long, Katie. It's not my job anymore. There was a long silence as Katie absorbed the weight of Rebecca's words. She had always been torn between her loyalty to Ethan and her desire to protect her mother. But today, something shifted. Katie nodded slowly. I understand, Mom. I want to help you. Rebecca reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. You are helping me by seeing this for what it is. We can't fix Ethan. He has to do that himself. That evening, Rebecca made a decision. She opened her laptop and published a post on social media, a simple declaration of her decision to set boundaries, to stop allowing herself to be manipulated by family. She didn't expect much, just a quiet affirmation of her choice. To her surprise, the post garnered a flood of support. Messages of encouragement from strangers, others who had set similar boundaries with toxic family members. And then came another message from Ethan. You're making a mistake. You're isolating yourself. Rebecca didn't respond. She didn't need to. The boundaries were set. And this time, there was no turning back. Rebecca stood on the porch of her new home, taking in the fresh, crisp air. The house before her felt like a new chapter, each room a blank canvas waiting to be filled with memories of her choosing. No more heavy walls or silent resentments. This place, this house, was hers. She had left the old house behind, the one that had been full of expectation and weight, where every room seemed to echo with years of unspoken tension. The space was quieter now, but not in the suffocating way it had been before. Here, there was freedom. The kind of freedom she hadn't realized she had been missing for so long. Katie had helped her move in. Bringing more than just boxes and furniture, she had brought lightness. Their relationship had shifted since Rebecca moved out, their bond growing stronger and more real. Katie was there, a constant presence, but not in a way that suffocated Rebecca's independence. It was the kind of relationship she had always longed for, a healthy, respectful space between mother and daughter. Rebecca smiled as she glanced around at her new life. The house was small but cozy, and everything in it felt like it belonged to her. It was her sanctuary, her retreat from the chaos of the past. She had found a new job at the local bookstore, something that had always felt like a dream. Shelving books, talking to customers, and getting lost in stories, everything about the work was soothing, grounding. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of pride in her independence, in the simplicity of the life she had built for herself. Katie came by regularly, bringing tea and homemade cookies. Their conversations were easy now, free of the guilt and strain that had once defined their interactions. They talked about the future, about Katie's life, and about the possibilities of Rebecca's. But they never spoke of Ethan. The silence on that subject spoke volumes. It was an unspoken understanding that Rebecca needed her space, her peace. Ethan's silence was even more deafening, his absence from her life more pronounced with each passing day. No texts, no calls. For the first time, it didn't bother Rebecca. In fact, it felt like a relief. He had tried to pull her back into his orbit, to manipulate her with his usual pleas, but she had firmly set the boundary, and she was finally feeling the weight of that decision lift off her shoulders. As she sat down at the kitchen table one evening, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, Rebecca realized something. She was free. She had reclaimed herself, her life, her peace. The weight of years spent living for everyone else had faded, replaced by the quiet joy of living for herself. And for the first time in years, Rebecca felt truly at home both in her new space and in her own skin. This was just the beginning. The envelope lay on the table before Rebecca, its weight surprisingly heavy in her hands. Ethan's handwriting was unmistakable across the front. For a moment, she stared at the letter, the familiar tug of guilt creeping in. She could already imagine the words inside, the same promises, the same apologies, the same attempts to win her back. She tore the envelope open slowly, her fingers moving on autopilot as she unfolded the letter. It was long, filled with regret and sorrow, each sentence seeming to apologize for the years of neglect and emotional manipulation. But then there was the familiar plea. "I need you, Mom. I'm sorry. Can we try again?" Her chest tightened as she read. For a moment, the old patterns tried to resurface, the old desire to fix things, to make it right for him, to be the mother he had always wanted. But Rebecca was different now. She had made her choice, and this wasn't part of it. She set the letter down, the decision already made. She didn't need to reread it. She didn't need to keep it. She stood up, walked to the recycling bin, and dropped it in without another glance. There was no hesitation this time, no guilt, no second-guessing. She had drawn her line in the sand, and she was not going to cross it. That evening, Katie came by, carrying a pot of tea and a tray of cookies. She set them down on the counter and immediately noticed the letter. It was still sitting on the table where Rebecca had left it, the edge of it peeking out of the recycling bin. "Mom, did you read it?" Katie asked, her voice uncertain. Rebecca nodded, taking a deep breath. "I did." Katie hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Are you going to respond to him? Maybe just acknowledge that he's sorry?" Rebecca smiled gently, feeling the familiar sense of clarity wash over her. She had been preparing for this conversation, had known Katie would ask. "No," she said softly. "I'm not going to respond. I've spent years trying to make it right, trying to fix things for him. But I've done all I can. Now it's his turn." Katie's eyes flickered with concern, but she nodded, though a little reluctantly. I know he's really struggling, Mom. He's asking for a second chance." Rebecca's expression softened. "I know he is, but my healing is more important than placating him. I can't keep carrying that weight for him. I've carried it long enough. Katie didn't speak immediately. She could see it now, the unshakable resolve in Rebecca's eyes. It wasn't about forgiving Ethan or fixing their relationship. It was about protecting herself, about setting the boundaries she had always needed. The conversation moved on, but in the back of Rebecca's mind, she could still hear Ethan's voice in the voicemail that had followed the letter. Please, don't shut me out. I need you. The words were raw, desperate, but they didn't pull at her like they used to. She had made her choice. She let the phone go unanswered, letting it go to voicemail again. And finally, she felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. Rebecca stood in the kitchen of her new home, the warmth of the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, casting soft shadows across the wooden floors. The house had settled into her, becoming more than just a space. It had become a home, a sanctuary, a place where she could breathe deeply, move freely, and exist without the weight of everyone else's expectations pressing down on her. Her mornings now began with long stretches of yoga, something she'd always wanted to do but never made time for in the past. She moved through the poses slowly, feeling her body waking up, grounding her into the present moment. The quiet of the house wrapped around her like a comforting blanket as she practiced, the gentle hum of nature outside her window filling the silence. Her life, once filled with obligations and demands, was now full of new experiences, small, beautiful, and simple. She'd started taking long walks through the quiet streets near her home, exploring the parks and tree-lined paths, sometimes pausing to sit and write in her journal, letting her thoughts flow freely onto the pages. The days, once so full of noise and struggle, were now peaceful and expansive. Katie continued to visit, her presence a welcome constant. They no longer danced around uncomfortable subjects. Their relationship had shifted into something authentic, where they could simply be themselves, no need to fix anything, no more baggage to carry. Their conversations often meandered from everyday topics to deeper ones, and Katie's visits, once a reminder of the old life Rebecca had left behind, were now an anchor in her new reality. One afternoon, as Rebecca was sipping tea in the sunroom, Katie came in, a text open on her phone. "Mom, I just heard something from Ethan," she said, her voice gentle, as though she was testing the waters. "He's dating someone now." Rebecca blinked, surprised, but there was no reaction beyond that. She'd long ago let go of the hold Ethan had on her. His silence in recent weeks had been deafening, and now, hearing this, new development, Rebecca felt. Nothing. No pain, no jealousy, just a quiet indifference. "That's good for him," Rebecca replied, her voice steady. She put her tea down and looked out the window, the soft glow of the setting sun bathing the room in gold. "It's what he needs to do, to move on. I've already done that." Katie watched her, her brow furrowing as if searching for some flicker of emotion in her mother's face. But Rebecca wasn't faking it. She had long ago buried the parts of herself that depended on Ethan's validation. The old Rebecca, the one who was emotionally tethered to him, was gone. And the woman she was becoming didn't need to cling to the past anymore. Later that week, as Rebecca was wrapping up her shift at the bookstore, she received a call from a local charity, one she had volunteered for a few months ago. They wanted her to speak at their next event, to share her journey of healing, of setting boundaries with toxic family members. The invitation was unexpected, but Rebecca's heart swelled with a quiet pride. She had been asked to share her story not for sympathy, but to inspire others who had been through the same kind of struggle. It was a recognition of her strength, of the hard-won wisdom she had gained through the pain. The event came and went in a blur of faces, kind words, and shared stories. Standing at the podium, Rebecca shared her journey with grace, the words flowing easily now, no longer painful but empowering. She spoke of the years she had spent trying to hold on to people who couldn't love her the way she deserved, and how she had finally learned to set boundaries. Her story resonated with the crowd, the room filled with nods and murmurs of understanding. Back at home that night, Rebecca collapsed into her favorite chair, a soft smile on her lips. Ethan's name had come up again, but it didn't sting. His messages had become sporadic, almost desperate at times. each one more hollow than the last. "You've ruined everything. I can't believe you're doing this to me." But Rebecca didn't need to read them anymore. She didn't need to respond. The boundaries she had set were firm now. The door was closed, and Ethan was finally out of her life. For good. Rebecca's phone buzzed one last time, and as she glanced at the screen, she saw another message from him. This one was different, though. Short, sharp. "Goodbye, Mom." She let out a breath, staring at the words. But there was no anger, no relief, just peace. Rebecca placed her phone down on the table and smiled, finally understanding what true freedom felt like. Ethan's goodbye wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of the life she had chosen. Rebecca sat in the quiet of her new home, a cup of tea in hand, looking out the window at the soft glow of the setting sun. It was one of those moments where everything felt right. The silence, the peace she had fought so hard for, was finally hers. No more emotional turmoil. No more manipulations. She had let go of the past, of everything that had weighed her down for so long. But there was still one thing left to do. She picked up her phone and dialed the number of the estate planner. Her inheritance, the wealth she had inherited years ago, had always been tied up in the complicated dynamics of her family. The old will, drafted years before her divorce from Tommy, had Ethan and Katie as the beneficiaries split equally. But things had changed. Her priorities had shifted. Ethan had made it clear that he could not be trusted, not with her life, not with her money. The conversation with the estate planner was short and clear. Rebecca made the decision that she would no longer let her past dictate her future. She arranged for the necessary updates. Katie, her daughter, would receive the support she deserved, but Ethan's share was going to be redirected. Not to him, but to charity. A cause that resonated deeply with Rebecca, the very cause that had been helping her along her own healing journey. The community center she had always dreamt of, one that would support people recovering from toxic family dynamics. She hung up the phone with a quiet sense of relief. It was done. The future she had envisioned for herself was now fully in her control. It wasn't just about money, it was about making sure her legacy was one of empowerment, of helping others heal in the way she had. But even in the peace of her new reality, there was still one more fight to come. A few weeks later, Rebecca was in her living room, reading through some paperwork for the community center project, when her phone buzzed. Ethan's name appeared on the screen. Her heart didn't race, as it would have in the past. It didn't even flinch. She had made her peace with him, with the idea of cutting him out of her life. But the message was different this time. He was angry, demanding. "Why did you cut me out of the will?" the message read. "Do you really think I don't deserve it? I'm your son. You're overreacting, Mom. I didn't deserve this." The words felt hollow to her now. They no longer carried the emotional weight they once did. She didn't feel the rush of guilt or the familiar knot in her stomach. Instead, she felt a strange sense of calm, a quiet reassurance that she had done the right thing. Rebecca's finger hovered over the reply button, but she didn't press it. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. No words could convince Ethan of anything he wasn't ready to see. He had crossed a line when he chose to take her for granted, when he chose to manipulate her with his entitlement. The boundaries had been set. The phone buzzed again, then again. "Please, just listen to me. You're going to regret this." Rebecca exhaled slowly, a soft smile tugging at her lips. She wasn't going to let this drag her back into his world of manipulation. The decision she had made wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about reclaiming herself, her life, her choices. She picked up her phone, tapped the screen, and deleted his messages. There was no response. There was no need for one. The next morning, Rebecca took another step forward. She launched a crowdfunding campaign for the community center, hoping to turn the vision into reality. She shared her story of healing, of reclaiming her life, of building something meaningful after years of sacrifice. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Strangers, people she had never met, began donating, reaching out, sharing their own experiences of recovery from toxic family dynamics. The campaign gained local and then national attention. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt like she was truly making a difference. The center would become a beacon for others who had been through what she had. The legacy of the woman she was becoming strong, independent, and at peace was beginning to take shape. But the echoes of Ethan's anger were still there. He wasn't done yet. The phone call came late one night. "You can't hide forever, Mom. You've made a mistake. I'm coming for what's mine." Rebecca didn't flinch. She let the call go to voicemail. She was done with guilt. Done with fear. This was her life now. And nothing, not even Ethan, could take that away from her. The first real sign that Rebecca's vision was becoming a reality came when the crowdfunding campaign for the community center reached its target goal. It was a moment of triumph, but also of quiet disbelief. She sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the donations, reading the messages of support from strangers. People who had never met her, never known the full story, were offering not just their money but their encouragement. The outpouring of support felt like a blanket, covering her in a way she hadn't expected. Katie, who had been beside her every step of the way, was bursting with pride. She had helped organize the opening event for the center, her excitement contagious as she buzzed around, finalizing details. Her energy was a welcome presence, reminding Rebecca of how far they had come from the days when their relationship was strained, when Katie's loyalty was torn between her mother and her brother. They were a team now, and Rebecca couldn't imagine doing this without her. As the opening event approached, Rebecca found herself walking through the nearly finished building, a space that was no longer just a dream, but a tangible place where people could come together and heal. The walls, still echoing with the work of construction, would soon be filled with the sound of people finding hope, just as she had. Jared, a family friend who had always quietly supported Rebecca from the sidelines, had stepped forward with an unexpected offer. He wanted to fund a scholarship at the center in her name. His gesture took her by surprise, and she couldn't help but feel humbled. Jared had known her during the darker years of her marriage, when her needs had been forgotten, when she had given so much and received little in return. "You've come a long way, Rebecca," he said as he handed over the check. "This is for everything you've fought for." Rebecca smiled, the weight of his words settling deeply within her. This was the recognition she had longed for, not from Ethan, not from anyone in her family, but from the people who truly understood her journey. The days following the campaign's success were filled with an energy Rebecca hadn't known in years. The final touches were put on the center, and soon she was standing on the stage at the opening event, a room full of faces staring back at her. People from all walks of life, some in recovery, others seeking answers, had come to hear her story. As Rebecca spoke, her voice was steady, her words flowing freely. She told them about her journey, about the years of sacrifice, about the pain of feeling unseen, about the decision to set boundaries and reclaim her life. She spoke not just of her own healing, but of the strength it took to let go of toxic relationships, to choose peace over guilt. The audience was silent as she spoke, and as she finished, the applause that followed felt different from anything she had experienced before. It wasn't for her alone, it was for the community she had helped build, for the lives she knew would be changed here. That evening, as Rebecca sifted through the stack of letters she had received from attendees, she felt something shift inside her. Many of the letters were from women, men, parents, children, people who had been estranged from their families, who had been through the kind of emotional neglect she had faced. They thanked her for sharing her story, for giving them permission to walk away, to set boundaries, to choose themselves. One letter in particular stood out. It was from a woman who had recently cut ties with her own abusive family. "Your story helped me realize that I'm not the problem," she wrote. "I'm doing the right thing by taking control of my life. Thank you for giving me the courage to move forward." Rebecca closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words wash over her. This was what she had always hoped for, that her story, her strength, would inspire others to do the same. She wasn't just healing herself. She was helping others heal, too. But even as she sat there, reflecting on how far she had come, the familiar buzz of her phone interrupted her thoughts. Another message from Ethan. "You can't just walk away from me. I'm your son. You'll regret this, Mom." The message was angry, but Rebecca didn't feel the weight of it like she once had. There was no sense of panic, no urge to respond. She had built something real. She had created a space for healing, and Ethan's words, however hurtful, no longer had the power to destroy what she had worked so hard to build. Rebecca smiled softly and put the phone down, choosing not to engage. She had found the strength to let go, and now, for the first time in her life, she was truly free. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, she ignored it. Her peace was more important than any apology or accusation. The center would open its doors, and Rebecca would continue to thrive. The life she had chosen, one of independence, healing, and giving back, was just beginning. And this time, no one could take that away from her. The grand opening of the community center was everything Rebecca had imagined and more. The space, now alive with the hum of conversation and the soft clinking of glasses, felt like a dream made real. Her dream. People from all walks of life had gathered, some seeking solace, others wanting to support her cause. But it was the stories she had heard from strangers, from people who had walked the path of recovery, that filled her with an overwhelming sense of purpose. Rebecca stood at the podium, her heart racing in the best possible way. She looked out at the crowd, families, individuals, friends, each one representing a new chapter in their own journey. And for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had created. It was no longer just an idea or a project. It was a tangible space where healing could begin. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her voice was steady as she addressed the crowd. This center is more than just four walls. It's a place where we can all heal, together. A space for those who've been hurt, neglected, or abandoned to find community and support. As she spoke, she glanced around. The faces in the crowd filled with hope, some even with tears in their eyes. This was her purpose, her legacy. The applause that followed was louder, stronger, and more resounding than any applause she had ever received. But it wasn't for her alone, it was for everyone who had come to find peace, for everyone who had stepped through the doors looking for a second chance. Then, as she began to make her way down from the stage, something caught her eye. Ethan. He was standing by the back of the room, watching her with an intensity that sent a brief, sharp chill down her spine. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, everything seemed to pause. He was there, of course. She had expected it. The man who had once been her son, the one she had tried so hard to fix, the one whose emotional manipulation had nearly broken her. And yet, here he was, still trying to reach out, still trying to pull her back into his world. But Rebecca's focus remained on the crowd. She wasn't here for him. She wasn't here to fix him. She was here for the people who needed her, for the future she had built. As the evening wore on, Ethan approached her, but Rebecca kept her distance. She acknowledged him with a brief glance, her resolve clear. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he just stood there, watching her. He looked lost. But that wasn't her problem anymore. Not today. After the event, Katie found her near the back of the building, her face glowing with pride. The night had been a success, but there was a quiet, reflective energy between them. "You did it? Mom," Katie said, her voice full of awe. "You really did it." Rebecca smiled softly, her heart full. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without you." Katie leaned against the wall, folding her arms, looking out at the center. "I know it wasn't easy, especially with everything going on with Ethan. But you're here, and this is your legacy. You're helping so many people." Rebecca nodded, taking in the beauty of the space, the way it felt like a reflection of everything she had fought for. "I've spent too much of my life trying to make other people happy, trying to fix things. But this is mine. This is the life I've chosen, and I'm proud of it." As they walked through the center one last time before the event came to a close, Rebecca paused in front of a large mural, a representation of strength, healing, and new beginnings. She ran her fingers lightly over the image, feeling the energy it exuded. This was the life she had built from the ashes of the past. Walking home that night, the streets quiet and peaceful, Rebecca took in the weight of everything she had achieved. She passed a billboard featuring her campaign for the community center, the words bold and clear: "A future built on healing, not regret. She paused for a moment, looking up at the sign, and let out a deep, contented breath. Her legacy was no longer tied to Ethan or her past. It was rooted in the people she had helped, in the future she was building, in the peace she had found within herself. As she walked through the front door of her home that night, she picked up her journal, the same one she'd carried with her through the years. She opened to a blank page, and as she wrote, the words flowed freely. I survived once. I lived once. I'll never go back. And for the first time in her life, she knew it was true.